So when the wild man had once more reached the dark forest, he took the boy down from his shoulder and said to him, "You will never see your father and mother again. I will keep you with me, for you have set me free, and I have compassion for you. If you do all I bid you, you shall fare well. Of treasure and gold I have enough, and more than anyone in the world." He made a bed of moss for the boy, on which he slept, and the next morning the man took him to a well and said, "Behold, the gold well is bright and clear as crystal, and you shall sit beside it and take care that nothing falls into it, or it will be polluted. I will come every morning to see if you have obeyed my order." The boy placed himself by the brink of the well, and often a golden fish or a golden snake showed itself therein, and he took care that nothing fell in. As he was thus sitting, his finger hurt him so violently that he involuntarily put it in the water. He drew it quickly out again, but saw that it had become quite gilded. And whatsoever pains he took to wash the gold off again, all was to of no purpose. In the evening, Iron Hans came back, looked at the boy, and said, "What happened to the well?" "Nothing, nothing," he answered, and held his finger behind his back that the man might not see it. But he said, "You have dipped your finger into the water. This time it may pass, but take care you do not let anything go in." By daybreak, the boy was already sitting by the well and watching it. His finger hurt him again, and he passed it over his head. And then, unhappily, a hair fell down into the well. He took it quickly out, but it was already quite gilded. Iron Hans came and already knew what had happened. "You have let a hair fall into the well," he said. "I will allow you to watch it once more. But if this happens for the third time, then the water is polluted and you can no longer remain with me." So the best way to understand what's going on here is male initiation ceremonies. An example is for pre-pubertal boys age 8 to 12 or just entering puberty to be taken away in the middle of the night by men of the tribe in mass. The mothers put on a show of being horrified by knowing that it is necessary for the boy to become a man. The boy is afraid and is in a liminal state betwixt and between boyhood and manhood. Often pain is inflicted that had to be courageously endured by being bitten by stinging ants, having a tooth knocked out, or circumcised. In Africa, some boys die during the endurance task that they must accomplish. The boy may learn the deeper myths of the tribe while being supported by the men in an act of male bonding. They come back to the tribe as young men in a transformed relationship with their mothers and the women of the tribe. So, Coco, I am a PhD biologist, and I like to ground Jungian concepts as much as possible in the body and in nature. So hopefully the boys and girls got good enough mothering, but their paths must diverge at puberty. Girls will continue on the feminine path toward eventually becoming mothers themselves, but the boys need to break and be informed by adult men what it is to be a man. The changes in the body and hormones at puberty produce fundamental differences in males and females, and fundamental differences as being in the body. A man will never know what it is like to experience the powerful cycles of fluctuation in hormones associated with the menstrual cycle, or have a child develop in your body, or the pain of childbirth, than the deep bonding with the nursing infant. So the experience of sex is also fundamentally different. A man is easily aroused and visually stimulated, while a woman is slower to arouse, but can have multiple orgasms, something men envy. Testosterone tends to make a man see a woman as a sex object more than vice versa. So males experience the drivenness of the sex drive so powerfully instinctual, as exemplified by a rutting buck deer or the male elephant. When inhibitions are lowered by drinking, women know how male sexual energy can be expressed in raw sexual terms. I think of initiation ceremonies as having to be so frightening, powerful, and archetypal as to channel the power of testosterone energy in positive directions. So there are fundamental differences in genitalia. The penis becomes engorged to form a firm phallus, very visible and ready to penetrate and vigorously engage the woman. The woman is the receiver with a moist, dark vulva. Much more is at stake because bacteria and fungi grow in moist, dark environments. Plus, getting pregnant is a major act and life changer for the woman. There can be complications during pregnancy and debilitating injuries, even death in childbirth, and possible postpartum depression. So the woman must be much more cautious about having intercourse. Men can produce sperm throughout their lives, whereas women are born with a given number of eggs that declines to about 300,000 at puberty, and she is no longer fertile after menopause. These fundamental differences easily lend themselves to symbolic statements. Yang energy and hexagram 1 are associated with the firm, strong, direction, action, light and visible, freedom, begetting, and spirit. Yin energy and hexagram 2 are associated with becoming, soft, dark, bringing together, yielding, receptive, manifesting in the material realm, embodying the spirit. How unusual that the 28-day menstrual cycle mimics the waxing and waning of moon cycles, in contrast to the bright, steady light of the sun, more associated with the masculine. So Robert Bly, in his book Iron John, made much of the profound changes in male relationships over the history of our species. For 290,000 of our 300,000 years as a species, we were hunter-gatherers, where men left the campsites and bonded in the hunt. With the rise of agriculture after the last ice age, boys and their fathers worked together in the barn and fields, still connected to the land and to the seasons. That was my experience. They moved to urban environments with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution at the end of the 18th century. Profoundly changed the father-son relationships. The father disappeared during the day and the boy had no idea what he was doing, only to see a tired man come home at night after the boy had spent time with the women in home or as school teachers. Initiation ceremonies vanished. So stories about wild men and wild women became popular with the rise of industrialization as people missed the natural environments they left behind. I would be interested how China is dealing with the largest migration in human history from rural to urban life. I suspect the annual holiday involving mass return to the land of one's family of origin partly at least addresses some of this issue. So our fairy tale is about the deepest source of masculine and yang energy for three reasons. First, the depth of the problem. Masculine energy distorted to deadly form puts us in the archetypal domain far beyond a complex that is felt to be personal. Second, the boy is not only in the wild forest, but also by a well in the forest. Think of the well in the I Ching, hexagram 48. Third, the well is bright and clear as crystal and not to be contaminated, i.e., it is in the spiritual archetypal dimension, further indicated by the well being golden, i.e., pure and precious. Would this be the pre-world arrangement of trigrams in the I Ching, the perfect balance, but not related to reality? It might even be thought of as Lao Tzu's source of the 10,000 things, even deeper than the male-female dichotomy. It's the dark enigma that the Tao points to. Is it that basic? I might add that I had a great course in picture interpretation at the Jung Institute in Zurich, and it was these pictures that this woman had drawn as she was approaching death. And her last image before death, everything was balanced. So I think of it kind of like going back to that prenatal state as one approaches death, or maybe even in a near-death experience. So the well is a man-made structure to tap into the groundwater, and hexagram 48 says is an inexhaustible dispensing of nourishment, like psychic energy, I would add. It is about, quote, the foundations of human nature that are the same in everyone, and every human being can draw in the course of his education from the inexhaustible wellspring of the divine in human nature. Wilhelm says, quote, for a satisfactory political or social organization of mankind, we must go down to the very foundation of life. For any merely superficial ordering of life that leaves its deepest needs unsatisfied is as ineffectual as if no attempt in order had ever been made. A man may fail in his education to penetrate to the real roots of humanity and remain fixed in convention. So man's nature would be like the golden ball after one has removed all the political, historical, cultural, economic, religious, and so on influences, or the converse, how our basic nature, the archetypes, look after going through those external influences. Our fairy tale is how our golden ball, especially for a male, got lost and how it can be retrieved, namely by going into the shadow side of masculine energy distorted by the mother. Actually, we shouldn't just blame the mother. It's the absence of the father or a weak or maybe frightening masculine in conjunction with a key being under the mother's pillow. For those of you that saw my case presentation on sand play therapy, the fellow had a witch-like mother and a totally weak and practically absent father. So a man's deepest path to the source is to form a unique relationship with his phallus, just as Anne Ulanoff said Cinderella had to form a unique relationship with her genitalia. The depth for Cinderella were the tree roots growing into her mother's grave, her feminine roots, and the deep emotional involvement was indicated by the tree being watered by her tears. So Jung said sex was just as important to him as it was for Freud, but Freud missed the symbolic dimensions of sex. The Greeks recognized a sacred dimension to the phallus and the vulva that we have lost in the West. Hermes was originally a male fertility god in an archaic pastoral part of ancient Greece, and later statues show him with an erection. This is the famous Athenian statue of Hermes. So Hindus have their yoni and lingam statues. So the well in our tale, is symbolic of the masculine, particularly the phallus, as the generative energy in the universe, because it is part of a gestalt associated with the wild man, and the contents of the golden well, the collective unconscious, are the fish and snake, both being phallic symbols. The boy's wounded finger got him connected to the wild man, wounded when letting the wild man out of the cage, and later connecting the boy to the deepest archetypal dimensions of the masculine when his finger contaminated the well. Recall that fingers are connected to the creative force associated with the phallus. And a common insult is to give someone the middle finger. So Hermes is closely associated with male generative energy, and I discuss these many dimensions of Hermes and sex in my book, Hermes, Ecopsychology and Complexity Theory. So I have long appreciated Jung's idea of the collective unconscious, where an individual ego consciousness is like the above water portion of an island in the ocean. Going down, still mostly above the water, the unconscious is the family level, then below water descending through the national, cultural, which would be east versus west, and the indigenous layers resting on a foundation of our animal ancestors. Jung associated the animal ancestors with the instinctual, mostly sexual side of human nature, as I discussed earlier. I would include in the education mentioned in hexagram 48 a knowledge of the layers of the collective unconscious, particularly in relation to our dysfunctional relationship with the environment. And I discussed this in my book, Jung and Ecopsychology, and in an interview with Ecopsychology Voices. And one important thing to remember about this diagram is that all the layers are continuously interacting. So the warnings in hexagram 48 are to go deep enough and not to come out too quickly. The dangers of coming out of the archetypal realm is the difficulty of the return motif in fairy tales, where all can be lost after the perilous journey into the archetypal domain. One must not commingle or confuse the personal and the domain with the archetypal. The boy putting his finger in the well, a single hair falling in, and then all of his hair dipping into the well. He will return slowly to glory, as we shall see, by starting from the bottom and integrating the wild man energy in battle and in contest. So a major problem for the analysand with the sand tray that I discussed last time was his rush to emerge too quickly after his initial contact with the wild man that was starting to come to life after being excavated in a dream that he had. I went into some detail about this in the well because to me it was one of the more enigmatic aspects of this fairy tale, and I just thought it was very significant. So several details in this paragraph from our fairy tale are important. The wild man has more than anyone in the world of treasure and gold. This is a classic gold in the dung, gold in the shadow motif, like the dragon guarding a treasure or imprisoning a maiden. The boy has connected to him, is relating to him, which opens an avenue for the transformation of both. This is the opposite of the shadow being some unknown deadly energy in the unconscious / forest suppression, or known fear locked up in a cage, which would be repression. The wild man has compassion for the boy and provides him with soft moss for a bed. This is nurturance and support from an archetypal masculine source. And it was the pain, the symptom, that connected him to the gods and to the source. What will be the spiritual foundation for himself as a male, associated with male as procreative energy? The first day it was the finger hurting that was involuntarily touched in the well. The second day was the finger passing through his hair, associated with thoughts and fantasies because they emerged from the head, and that is what caused the hair to fall into the well. This is very important. A tremendous amount of valuable potential psychic energy is really being locked away, not available for consciousness because of what the wild man represents. And that's what you're doing in therapy. You're trying to move through and loosen up all the things that are distorting and trapping and constricting your psychic energy. So our fairy tale continues. On the third day, the boy sat by the well and did not stir his finger, however much it hurt him. But the time was long for him, and he looked at his reflection of his face on the surface of the water. And as he still bent down more and more while he was doing so and trying to look straight into the eyes, his long hair fell from his shoulders into the water. He raised himself up quickly, but the whole of the hair of his head was already golden and shone like the sun. You can imagine how terrified the poor boy was. He took his pocket handkerchief and tied it around his head in order that the man might not see it. When he came, he already knew everything and said, "Take the handkerchief off." Then the golden hair streamed forth and let the boy excuse himself as he might. It was of no use. You have not stood the trial and cannot stay here any longer. Go forth into the world. There you will learn what poverty is. But as you do not have a bad heart, and as I mean well by you, there is one thing I will grant you. If you fall into any difficulty, come to the forest and cry, Iron Hans, and then I will come and help you. My power is great, greater than you think, and I have gold and silver in abundance. So the boy got a deep reflection of himself from a narcissistic perspective, became conscious of himself, and got a glimpse of who he really was when he looked eye to eye at his face in the pond. The eye is the seat of the soul. He has been contaminated with the awesome power and beauty of the spiritual archetypal world by his hair turning golden after touching the well water. He began to become conscious when a hair fell into the well. Now it's his whole head of hair. The danger is the inflation that comes with an identification with the archetypal realm. It is impersonal, not human. Fusion with that realm or regression to it is to revert to the childhood union with the mother, hence the Oedipal taboo. Jung didn't recognize the problem until he was about to enter university and had a dream of having to shield with his hand a small lit candle against a mighty wind blowing against it. He realized that personality number 2, God's world, later called the realm of the mothers, that he escaped into when things got too miserable in his life as personality number 1, was not to be lived in, but related to. The candle was the light of consciousness. Jung later identified personality number 2 with the collective unconscious. Like Adam and Eve being expelled from the Garden of Eden, Jung had to go into the harsh world of what he described in Memories, Dreams, Reflections as study, money-making, responsibility, entanglements, confusions, errors, submissions, defeats. This is going from the pre-world arrangement of trigrams to the latter world arrangement, from the eternally static to the time-bound. So one cannot live in the garden, but has to be in relationship to it, inspired by it like hexagram 1, the creative, while embodying it in space and time in hexagram 2, the receptive. Jung gave an elegant description of his after his near-death experience in 1944. So after Jung was brought back to life, for 3 weeks, he was awake for an hour around midnight, quote, in an utterly transformed state, in an ecstasy, safe in the womb of the universe, with the highest possible feeling of happiness, end of quote. During daytime, quote, everything irritated me. Everything was too material, too crude and clumsy, terribly limited, both spatially and spiritually, end of quote. Jung later appreciated the importance of limitations and saw humans' role to be giving God objective existence in three-dimensional reality. Hexagram 60, limitation says, quote, the individual achieves significance through discrimination and the setting of limits, end of quote. And remember, at the psychological development realm, we are talking about leaving the kind of the oceanic realm of the great mother in her embracing, nurturing form, and that's what the Oedipal complex is there to prevent us from doing, to kick us out into the world of reality and to mature. So Jung admired the story of Teton Sioux Indian, Black Elk, as described by a book that was on our reading list in Zurich, Black Elk Speaks. Jung said it illustrates how rituals emerging from visions of a single individual when he was 9 years old, around 1894. And he was unconscious with an unknown illness for 12 days, during which time he was given the entire pantheon of Sioux spirits. Afterwards, he was frightened with thunderstorms and lightning, which were prominent elements in his vision. He finally recalled the vision to a shaman who told Black Elk he had to become a shaman, and he became a very powerful one, designing many rituals for his tribe based on his visions. This was grounding the eternal archetypal realm into space and time. Probably better said that the rituals based on Black Elk's vision helped the people participating in the rituals to enter archetypal space. And that's what living myths and religions are supposed to do. I noticed as well that the introduction to Black Elk Speaks is by Vine Deloria Jr., and Vine Deloria was a highly regarded Native American philosopher and writer. And he said later in his life that Jungian psychology was the best Western framework for relating to the indigenous world because of things like Jung's emphasis on dreams, visions, and synchronicity. Another way of saying it is that in that diagram of the layers of the collective unconscious, that Jungian psychology is one of the best ways for our conscious and cultured and developed minds to relate to the indigenous layer of the collective unconscious and the animal ancestors layer of our collective unconscious. Jungian analyst James Hillman said that our dreams are zoological cathedrals. In other words, they're like sacred places for the animal spirits that survive in our modern psyches. And I would think of it in terms of like Chinese mythology. The little I know is that the yellow emperor got the trigrams from either a yellow dragon or a tortoise, I think, that came out of the river. The trigrams were on the back of the tortoise. So that deep connection of the trigrams with nature has always impressed me. And one of my dreams I had when I was training in Zurich is that I was walking outside, and when I would look at things in the environment like trees or water or whatever, there would be hexagrams or trigrams forming and then disappearing into those natural elements. I should add that I have had the fortune of many years of experiencing Sioux Indian ceremonies, pipe ceremony, sweat lodge, and the Sundance. And I did ran some men's groups years ago. So this is material that I have some experience with that I'm talking about. So I worked with a woman in her 30s who dreamt she was in a sacred candlelit room and was moved to her depths when she saw her name in the book of life on a table in the middle of the room. Then someone showed her the door and it opened onto a dark inner city alleyway. Perhaps the most classic story of the expulsion was the Buddha, leaving his princely home after his parents did all they could to isolate him from the harsh reality of the world. Immediately upon leaving the palace, he was shocked to see death and poverty. This was my favorite place that my daughter took me to in Hong Kong, the Big Buddha. Really impressive. So in Cinderella, the poverty road started with the loss of the specialness when the stepsisters made her do endless cycles of grunge work in the house in service of them. So many people have powerful spiritual experiences using drugs, which can be helpful for introducing them to the spiritual realm. But if this is done often as an escape from reality, it stymies psychological development. So a man who had powerful moving experiences with weekend use of marijuana dreamt he and 3 others had pulled a giant fish out of the very peak of a huge mountain. The question became, how do we get this thing down? So the puer has great difficulty bringing potential into reality and being grounded. Lorena Koss described a problem in relation to the positive mother complex where one has great difficulty dealing with limitations like boundaries between people and feeling special and expecting the world to come to oneself. So Charles, in the case I described in the last lecture, struggled mightily not to go to excess, getting guidance from hexagram 62, preponderance of the small, to act with, quote, exceptional modesty and conscientiousness, and not strive after lofty things, but hold to lowly things, end of quote. His fall from grace and specialness he felt with his mother left him extremely depressed and angry. Robert Bly and Iron John, with his focus on men, associated the expulsion and the poverty with a lot of grieving for men, grieving for what they never got from their fathers. So, two little details before we go to the next paragraph in the fairy tale. Iron Hans recognized that the boy did not have a bad heart. Can we assume he got that from good enough mothering? Also note Iron Hans means well by the boy and offers to help him if called upon, reminding the boy again that he has gold and silver in abundance. In other words, much psychic energy bound up in his realm. So the relationship of youth to the wild man echoes hexagram 4, youthful folly, which says, quote, folly is not an evil in youth, providing that the youth himself must be conscious of his lack of experience and must seek out the teacher, indicating the necessary receptivity. This is the reason why the teacher waits to be sought out instead of offering himself, end of quote. The alchemical text, the Rosarium, says the alchemist must be humble, honest, and faithful. So Jung talked about the importance of establishing a relationship with, quote, the little people, end of quote, in our psyches, as seen in the people in our dreams. In the movie Avatar, a protagonist was told he would recognize which of the powerful flying dragons would be his steed by the one that tried to kill him. Boy, those hills look a lot like what I saw around Guilin, China. So we continue with the tale. Then the king's son left the forest and walked by beaten and unbeaten paths, ever onward until at length he reached a great city. There he looked for work, but could find none, and he had learned nothing by which he could help himself. At length he went to the palace and asked if they would take him in. The people about court did not know what use they could make of him, but they liked him and told him to stay. At length the cook took him into his service and said he might carry wood and water and rake the cinders together. Once, when it so happened that no one was at hand, the cook ordered him to carry the food to the royal table. But as he did not like to let his golden hair be seen, he kept his little cap on. Such a thing as that had never yet come before the king's notice, and he said, when you come to the royal table, you must take your hat off. He answered, ah, Lord, I cannot. I have a sore place on my head. Then the king took the cook aside, called him before him and scolded him and asked him how he could take such a boy as that into his service, and that he was to send him away at once. The cook, however, had pity on him and exchanged him for the gardener's boy. So after leaving the forest, the prince walked the beaten and unbeaten paths ever onward, at length. So this is the archetypal domain of hexagram 56, the wanderer. Wilhelm states, strange lands and separation are the wanderer's lot. He has no fixed abode, his home is on the road. He has no large circle of acquaintances, therefore he should not give himself airs. He must be cautious and reserved, obliging toward others, and take care to remain upright and steadfast, which will win success. So the prince has moved from one kingdom to another, from being a child prince in his kingdom of origin, to starting over from scratch without any skills to survive in the harsh world of reality in a great city. With the incest taboo blocking regression to psychic energy to the mother, the libido can become progressive and move to higher consciousness by being canalized into mother analogies. Jung said the city is a maternal symbol, a woman who harbors the inhabitants in herself like children. Jung points out that the meaning and purpose of this canalization are particularly evident when the city appears in place of the mother. The infantile attachment is a crippling limitation for the adult, whereas attachment to the city fosters civic virtues and at least enables him to have a useful existence. In primitives, the tribe takes place of the city, in the Jung's quote. We will see how this second city will offer the prince an opportunity to canalize wild man energy into something positive for the city. Can you guess what that might be? I just noticed how that symbol under the shield is kind of another lingam and yoni symbol. The phallus and the vulva, if you will. So the prince gravitates to the palace, the seat of power in the new kingdom, and as a totally unknown, nobody knows what to make of him. Again, notice they liked him. There's something likable about this guy, thanks to his positive mothering. He starts at the bottom, helping the cook by carrying wood and water and raking cinders together, echoes of Cinderella. He's not even learning a craft, cooking. He gets his first exposure to the new center of power, the king, but because he is at the very beginning of being able to ground and embody the wild man energy, he cannot show his golden hair, the emblem of his connection to the archetypal power of the wild man. You have to imagine psychologically how difficult the situation is to have a sense that there's something kind of precious and powerful in you, but you can't express it, you can't let it out. You're stuck in this grunge work phase. And as such, think of what it must have been like, Charles, with the sand tray, to have some sense of power and so eager to kind of get it out and be in the world, but he was trying to go way too fast. So the situation is described in hexagram 1, the creative, line 1 that says, hidden dragon, do not act. Here, the creative force is still hidden beneath the earth and therefore has no effect. This symbolizes a great man who is still unrecognized. Nevertheless, he remains true to himself. He does not allow himself to be influenced by outward success or failure, but confident in his strength, he abides his time. The time will fulfill itself. So the boy gets expelled from the powers in the human domain. The king orders him to be sent away. Now he's really up a creek without a paddle. Because he's a likable guy, the cook had pity on him and exchanged him for the gardener's boy. Likable, and probably he was using his I Ching and following the advice of hexagram 56, the wanderer. Next in the fairy tale we read, and now the boy had to plant and water the garden, hoe and dig and bear the wind and bad weather. This is getting really grounded, akin to Cinderella's twig that grew into the earth of her mother's grave and watered by her tears. The garden is a domesticated space where the human works with and in nature to cultivate plant life derived from the natural world. Plants perform the miracle that all animal life depends upon, transforming inorganic into organic matter with energy from the sun, those strange photons, paradoxically being both particles and waves. This is the alchemist as gardener, patiently working with nature in the elements at the pace nature sets. How Taoist. So next we read, once in summer when he was working alone in the garden, the day was so warm he took his little cap off that the air might cool him. This is summer in the 4 phases in any cycle of change described in the I Ching, spring, growth, harvest, and trial. Summer is when things inspired or sown in spring develop into forms in space and time. So the human is creating a form, ego strength, to ground, contain, embody wild man energy. Things are heating up. The energy level is increasing. The heat from the sun causes the boy to expose his hair. The consequences are immediate, for we read, as the sun shone on his hair, it glittered and flashed so that the rays fell into the bedroom of the king's daughter, and up she sprang to see what that could be. These are the rays from the sun god, symbolic associations to archetypal masculine yang, with the sun in contrast with the feminine yin associated with the softer, moister, cyclic light of the moon. The connection with the sun and the hair is made, and the boy sun has been grounded just enough to be ready to be reflected, seen, discovered by the anima, emphasizing the reflective aspect of the feminine, like Our Lady of the Lake. So there we have the sun god. Yeah, that's the sun god. And now we're on to the next slide, Our Lady of the Lake. Yep. So Our Lady of the Lake, here the reflection is off the princess's bedroom walls, a quite private and intimate space, and not the surface of the lake. This is not the narcissistic reflection of the boy seeing himself in the water, but a reflection by the deeper levels of the anima, where it acts as a function of the self, what the self sees in us. So the moment is similar to line 2 of hexagram 1 that says, dragon appearing in the field, it furthers one to see the great man. Commentary reads, here the effects of the light-giving power begins to manifest itself. The great man makes his appearance, but as yet he has no commanding position, but can influence others without conscious effect. It is favorable to see him because such a man is destined to gain great influence and to set the world in order. So next we read, then she saw the boy and cried to him, boy, bring me a wreath of flowers. This is active feminine energy pursuing what is of interest to her, perhaps emboldened by the fact that she is the king's daughter, speaking to what she thinks is a commoner, but a commoner with something very unique about himself. She makes a strong arose move by asking for flowers. So grounded in the earth, flowers evolved in a symbiotic relationship with very active animals, often bees, by attracting them, calling to them with scent and color to be pollinated. Hermes is associated with a bee oracle given to him by his brother, the sun god Apollo. In Apollo's youth, he had played with the bee oracle in the context of bees and cows. Hermes is a connecting link between the strong connection with the instinctual feminine and his brother Apollo. He is neither of these, but the eros between them, like a bee, in other words. I discuss this in detail in my book, Hermes, Ecopsychology, and Complexity Theory. So the boy's response to the call from the feminine is immediate. He put his cap on with all haste and gathered wildflowers and bound them together. But no, when he was ascending the stairs with them, the gardener met him and said, how can you take the king's daughter a garland of such common flowers? Go quickly and get another and seek out the prettiest and the rarest. Oh no, replied the boy, the wild ones have the most scent and will please her better. The boy is in connection with instinctual masculine energy represented by the wild man, knows the invisible power of scent. So entomologists like myself are very aware of the power of pheromones, external hormones that insects use, and so do humans. An interesting experiment revealed that women, given a choice of chairs, unbeknownst to them, would sit in a chair previously occupied by a man because of the scent of a man. Smell is a very primal sense, with sense neurons growing directly out of our brain. We seldom dream of smells. The Greek says that the dead orient by smells. And so we read the last of our fairy tale for this section. When he got into the room, the king's daughter said, take your cap off. It's not seemly to keep it on in my presence. He again said, I may not. I have a sore head. She, however, caught his cap and pulled it off, and then his golden hair rolled down on his shoulders, and it was splendid to behold. He wanted to run out, but she held him by the arm and gave him a handful of ducats. With these he departed, and he cared nothing for the gold pieces. He took them to the gardener and said, I present them to your children. They can play with them. The following day, the king's daughter again called to him, and that he was to bring her a wreath of field flowers. And when he went in with them, she instantly snatched at his cap and wanted to take it away from him. But he held it fast with 2 hands. She again gave him a handful of ducats, but he would not keep them and gave them to the gardener for playthings for his children. On the 3rd day went just the same. She could not get his cap away from him, and he would not have her money. So notice the profound shift between the encounters with the powers in the New Kingdom. The king, at the most dominant masculine position, is so abused by the boy not paying homage to him that he expels him from the kingdom for not taking off his hat, a move reminiscent of Kingdom 1 when the king declared the deadly forest off limits. In Kingdom 2, the feminine is not the mother locking up and thereby distorting the masculine energy, but an anima as a step beyond the mother, able to reflect and seeing a golden power coming through a human form. The wild man power is still being tamed, humanized, domesticated, and is not ready to be fully embraced and revealed. This is like Cinderella at the ball being seen and adored by the prince, but she had more shadow work to do with the feminine. So the gold the princess offered the boy is what the alchemists call vulgar gold, worldly material values, like the fancy adornments of Cinderella's sister. Some alchemists knew they were not literally trying to turn lead into gold, but were engaged in a spiritual process of transmuting the heavy leaden energy in their psyches into something of ultimate value, gold, what Jung described as the analytic process. In Christianity, this is the story of Jesus being tempted by the devil to have ultimate power as a king on earth. The boy was not to be bought off. To him, the gold offered by the princess was of no more value than glittery playthings for children. His true value was not yet ready to be seen. Indeed, he had much work to do on his shadow, as we will see next time.
So there are 2 questions from Lixia just now. So the first one, she's curious about, that is to have the primary or wild energies and canaled and into the city. And she's wondering if you are mentioning about to tame the wild energy and make it to be grounded and adjust to the modern or more conscious life. Is that right? And yeah, so she wants to confirm whether you mentioned that we need to have to ground such wild energies inside of us.
Part of it is what Jung meant by symbols, and the symbols really are like not exactly a catalyst, but it's what helps move instinctual energy into more human forms, if you will. So the energy connected initially with the mother, the physical mother, and the closeness to her, that gets moved into something more like symbolic, like a city, which does some of the same functions as the physical mother. It's containing, it's protective, nurturing, and so on. So that's what Jung meant by that. And we have to be careful, because what this tale is about at another dimension is when you leave like Mother Nature and your connection with nature and move into an urban environment. That's where the city can be negative, because you're so physically removed from nature that you remove that powerful connection that the Taoists, I think, were so aware of. So you can look at it 2 ways: canalizing, as they put it, into a canal, and you also have to be aware of the dangers of the city in losing our instinctual side, which is more connected with nature. The second aspect is something that I am particularly interested in, and so was Jung. I mean, Jung lived in the biggest and most cultured, one of the most cultured cities in Europe, certainly in Switzerland. But he talked about the importance of growing his own potatoes. And he spent a lot of time in Bollingen, which was very primal, if you will. And my personal experience of that, living here in a big city, in the biggest one in Wisconsin, is I go every day beside Lake Michigan, and just to feel the land and the water and the air and so on. It's so wonderful. And I'm very aware there are a lot of poor inner city African Americans that have never been to the lake. And that's what Dora Kolff, who started sand play therapy with the Jungians, talked about. The sand is like the connection with the element earth. Well, earth is not an element. She was referring to the ancient Greek concept of the elements being earth, air, fire, and water. So she was talking about like an archetypal connection with the earth or the land as one important aspect of doing sand play therapy. I'm so interested what's happening in Chinese culture, given how many people have moved from a rural kind of farming environment to the big cities and manufacturing and everything, and what the effect is on the psyche and the connection with the earth and so on. You have done that so fast and in such mass numbers. This would be such an interesting study for psychologists and sociologists. And gardening is considered to be one of the ways that ecopsychologists talk about having people reconnect or stay connected to the land. And in our fairy tale, we can think of gardening as one way. The prince is kind of grounding himself and moving the wild man energy into more of a domesticated space, which is what a garden is. Somewhere between wild and domestic. It's kind of like pets, like our animal pets. I could talk about this all night. We should probably go on to another question.
So that is the next question in about hexagram, and that is a 50 ding. You know, one she relate to Jung, and the hexagram 50. And Jung once said that maybe the development of analytical psychology functioning as the cauldron, right? Am I clear?
Functioning as a what?
As the ding, and they 50 hexagram.
Oh, the cauldron.
Mm.
Yeah, and what did he say was functioning like the cauldron?
So the question, maybe from the forward, and from Jung into the I Ching, Wilhelm stated, and when he mentioned what his idea about the development of analytical psychology to the modern world and its function, and maybe, and the connection is the boys in the kitchen, and reminds her of the hexagram, or maybe related to the explanation of the hexagram.
I was going to pick up more on the symbolism of the kitchen. It's a place where you transform raw materials into delicious food. You bring all these things together. However, he got demoted from the kitchen. He didn't even learn how to cook. He just had to carry the water and keep the fire going and so on. So that's when he got put down to even more basic level, growing the food to take into the kitchen. He had to get to the ground level. But I was thinking about her comment about the cauldron. What that is, if you start off with regular food and just think of it as, something to nourish you and so on. But what the cauldron is, it's more like a symbol. It's what the the king or the emperor used in the sacred ceremonies. So it was food in the sacred or more symbolic dimension. That is my understanding of the cauldron. It's a little bit like in Christianity, where Jesus turned the bread and the wine into like his body and blood. It's that transformation into the sacred dimension. So we have to think of food. It's a little bit like if you had food in the lower trigram of something and food in the upper trigram. It'd be something like that. I think that is, if I remember correctly, that's how the hexagram providing nourishment talks about it. I think some of the lower lines are concerned more with physical nourishment, and I think some of the upper lines are connected more with spiritual nourishment. I'd have to look at that hexagram again, but I'm pretty sure that's what that hexagram is about.
Yeah, there's a specific question about the boy is reflected by the self you mentioned, the family. Why can't you say that he was reflected by his animus? And is there any difference when we mention the self reflected by the self and by the anima?
Yeah, that's one of the dimensions that I love about Jung, the way he talked about the anima and the animus. And I mentioned this before, the reference I made to Leonard Cohen's song Suzanne, for example. Level 4 anima is beyond the spiritual, which in the West is largely associated with like the Virgin Mary, to spiritual. And then level 4 is that mysterious woman that's fascinating. You can't quite put your finger on it. It lures you into a connection with her. And Jung said that that type of anima, that human being as other for a male, is a function of the self. That's like the self, like presenting it at one level as other to a male, other of this particular type of feminine, what Jung called level 4 anima, as opposed to level 1, which is just pure physical, sexual, woman as a mate, sexual object in a way. Level 4 still has that connection with the instinctual, if you will. It has a spiritual dimension, but it's at that kind of wave and particle state. It's kind of how I think about it.
One question about the movement. You mentioned that for the individual, they need to get out of the Eden paradise to leave, which means to leave the Great Mother. And since the Great Mother may be related to the Oedipus complex, so could you please say more about it? Once the individual wants to regress to the grandma or to the Great Mother, does it mean that it's related to the Oedipus complex?
Yes, I talked about that, I think, rather extensively in the last lecture, where I went into past talking about the fathers, the mothers, and the sons. Yes. And it's a pretty basic, understandable thing, is that we come into the world growing inside of a woman's womb, her uterus. So there's that fundamental connection with the mother, and then to be nourished by her with fluids coming right out of her body. And you have to think of the touch and the smells, the scent of the particular mother, very unique. Every individual has a unique scent. And then the cycles that the woman goes through has an effect on the whole family, the menstrual cycle and the hormones that are released and the pheromones and all that. So there is a rather natural desire to just want to stay at home and be taken care of by the mother. That's what Kost was talking about. But we can't do that. You know, we have to get out into the world, which can be harsh and challenging and so on. So that's where this connection, especially for men, has to be made. And that's what the initiation ceremonies were about. And they were easier to do when you had this more distinct separation of the men's tasks and the women's tasks, the men going out hunting or the men going out into the fields and so on. So it was easier for a boy to see what it was to be a man. But in the modern cultures where the men would go off to work in the offices of the factories and the boys were mostly around women, that's when it became more difficult for men to know what it is to be a man. And that's an important dimension of what this is about. So the Oedipal complex is that complex about not regressing back to stay with the mother, wanting to stay with the mother. It's talked about as the fear that the father will do something to you. So next week, we will see the exciting climax to our tale about Iron Hans.